Hello, and welcome to today's unique episode where I sit down and answer some of the questions that have been submitted to me by you, the fans and supporters who make the opportunity for me to impact the world in the biggest way possible. There are some really great questions, and I cannot wait to dive into this with you. If you'd like an opportunity to have one of your questions answered, feel free to visit MieshaTate.com and submit a question. And I look forward to hearing from you, and this is going to be fun. As always, thanks for listening. The first question is submitted by Chloe. She said, I was wondering how old you were when you finally discovered self-love. I'm 27 and I've been battling with myself a lot of times. I stay in my own head. I recently got out of a toxic relationship and I'm also a type 1 diabetic. I have to take lots of insulin shots every day. Sometimes even that becomes too much. I always look for love in all the wrong places, been down the wrong path. I don't know what I want most of my relationships. They never really work out. I was wondering if you could give me some advice on how I can discover self-worth and love and the do's and don'ts. So, Chloe, I honestly think it's important to remember that this is an evolving process and it's not a destination. Self-love doesn't necessarily equal happiness, but in my experience, it equals inner peace. Happiness, like any other emotion, is fleeting. It comes and it goes. But it's the internal peace that keeps you grounded. I know it was a big switch for me when I started getting curious about my feelings and thoughts, opposed to judgmental or using other techniques like compartmentalization that were not only not helpful, but they were harmful in the long run. I encourage you to give yourself grace and be kind in your thoughts and actions towards yourself. We all have intrusive thoughts. We all have difficult moments for sure. But I know this all started to change for me when I started to ask myself, why? Why am I sad right now? Why am I depressed? What about my life and current situation is contributing to this feeling? What about my past is still affecting me right now? And I ask these questions with kindness towards myself and a curiosity. And in my worst moments of anxiety and despair, I lean on this simple question: what can I control? Sometimes it feels like so much of life is out of our control. And sometimes something as simple as knowing you can control a nice, slow, deep breath, that can help bring you out of a state of anxiety and back into a position of leverage. And this is a huge help. I learned this from a cognitive behavioral therapist. If you can, I would recommend investing in yourself and finding someone certified in CBT to help give you the tools to change the way that you respond to things. I would like to describe this as a foundational change as opposed to a surface level change, which is what I find most of us are accustomed to doing. And it never addresses the root cause, and therefore it doesn't ever truly fix the issue at hand. I was 29 years old when I chose myself. 29 years old when I left a toxic relationship and decided I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to live the way I had been, and I needed to do something different in order to accomplish a better life for myself. But truthfully, this was just the beginning. It doesn't mean it's all sunshine and rainbows since then, and it was and still is a challenging process at times. But I know how to look at myself with kindness and curiosity as opposed to fear and judgment. And once you make that small change, it is impactful and it's such a shift. And I think the entire trajectory of your life can change in an instant. There's a quote I'd like to share with you by Eleanor Roosevelt. It says, "A woman is like a tea bag. You can't tell how strong she is until you put her in hot water." And I would like to add to that, knowing your strength is great, but it doesn't mean that you have to live in hot water. Lastly, when it comes to being a type 1 diabetic, I'd encourage you to listen to episode 43 with Candy and Tom Frazier. Tom is a type 1 diabetic, and he shares some really profound insights that may be of interest to you, especially how he got his insulin under control. So I hope this is helpful, Chloe, and I wish you all the best. And next we have a question from Edwin. What's glutamine help with? Well, glutamine is an amino acid that plays a big role in supporting the immune system, gut health, and muscle recovery. Our bodies naturally produce glutamine, but at times supplementation might be helpful, like during illness, injury, or intense physical activity. So, in episode 40, where I interview Nurse Doza, we dive into some of the benefits of taking glutamine and how it can be protective for your digestive health. I've always been a big fan of glutamine because it helps me not only feel less sore, but recover faster from muscle soreness. It's definitely a staple supplement for me and probably the longest, most used supplement that I've ever taken. So, what I didn't know though is how it can be helpful for the gut until I spoke with Nurse Dosa. So now I make sure to take glutamine before I eat any inflammatory foods. Like, for example, if I'm going to a birthday, a barbecue, or like any place I know I'm going to indulge, I just throw a scoop in my water beforehand. And that's just to be a bit more proactive in my health while accepting I'll never be perfect. It's nice because it has like little to no flavor. It mixes in water well. And I would also like to note some foods that are higher in glutamine because you don't necessarily need a supplement. So if you're looking to get it from your food, you could try bone broth and organic bone broth collagen protein, grass-fed whey protein, grass-fed raw dairy, grass-fed beef or bison, spirulina, cabbage, asparagus, broccoli, venison, and last but not least, some organic poultry. These foods have higher amounts of glutamine, so it's a good source to get them from. Great question. I love talking about nutrition. Next, we have a question from Dan. He says, "Hey, Miesha, I hope you're doing well. I stumbled across your podcast this week with Dr. Peter Martone, and from there, I listened to Carnivore JT episode, and I recently decided to give the carnivore diet a try. So we'll see how it goes. I'm curious how it's going. Let me know." The reason he says he's reaching out, I'll go back to it, says, though, is because I have a 14-year-old daughter who plays high-level hockey. She's been a vegetarian for the past 9 years, and while she does hunt and fish, she doesn't eat meat. She feels that meat doesn't agree with her, and I'm always concerned about whether she's getting enough energy and nutrients to fuel her performance. Right now, she's consuming about 120 to 140 grams of protein each day, but I'm still unsure if her overall diet is meeting her needs. Do you know of any dietitians, nutritionists, or resources that could help me ensure her diet is balanced and supportive of her athletic demands? I'd really appreciate any recommendation or advice you might have. Thanks so much for your time and keep up the amazing work on your podcast. Well, this is a beautiful question, and I feel like I can relate in some ways, although my kids are not old enough to decide if they're vegetarians or not, so I do feed them meat. But Dan, I understand as a parent how it can feel concerning if it seems like your children may not be getting enough nutrition or the right nutrients. I work through this myself every day, just trying to get at least 15 grams of protein in my children for breakfast. They don't really like eggs and sometimes just aren't in the mood for meat for breakfast. So, they're always asking me for something more like pancakes in the morning. And as of late, I've kind of settled on yogurt. I feel like it's a happy medium. Okay, with that being said, I like that your daughter is healthy and intelligent, and she certainly is eating more protein than women or girls her age typically. So I don't believe there's a reason for, a big alarming concern. And I think that everybody's different and every body is different. Everything from our genetics to our epigenetics, how we evolve for our food and nutrient needs. And what works for some people won't be the best for others. My personal belief is that it is a good idea to prioritize meat consumption, as my understanding is that the bioavailability of nutrients is better for humans, and the food naturally itself, meat, prioritizes protein, which is always great. But you did mention she has communicated that meat doesn't agree with her. So, look, I believe humans were meant to eat meat. And I think that if meat doesn't agree with her or anyone, I would think this might be more of a digestive issue with her gut or digestive enzymes that could probably be remedied with the right help. I know I've mentioned this episode a lot, in this episode, but Candy Frazier in episode 43 talks about healing the gut. She talks about it more from like a sugar perspective, and sugar cravings. So we didn't dive deep in that episode about gut healing, but I've heard her talk about it ad nauseum, and she's really educated on the topic. And I think it's possible that she might be someone who could be a helpful resource in fixing the gut and the microbiome. I also believe that Dr. Chris Motley, he's located in Nashville, and featured on episode 27, would be a great source for a holistic healing approach. His podcast is called the Ancient Health Podcast, and as well as Nurse Doza in Austin, Texas, episode 40. That's also a great resource in the topic of gut health, and that's what his podcast is really all about. He talks about good poops all the time. So the podcast is The School of Doza, and he is great. I hope these are a few resources that I know that are trusted, that are great, and I hope that helps kickstart your journey, and at the very least, change your Instagram algorithm to point you in the right direction of people who can help you. So thank you for your question today. It was great, and I wish you all the best for yourself and your daughter. And do update on the carnivore diet. I'm curious how that's going. The next question is submitted by Christine. She said, "It sounds like we both were in situations that made us think about suicide. The growth that you have talked about and shared is a big part of your journey and healing and really putting yourself first. Did you go to counseling or just had really great support from someone who passed on their experiences, wisdoms, tips, whatever it may have been? I know we all grow differently, but you're sharing/living things now that I didn't learn and start practicing until I turned 50. And after 3 years of therapy. It's so awesome to hear that someone your age really has an idea of how to navigate life in such a positive way and still being open to learning/growing more every day." So, hey, Christine, thank you so much for the question. For a very long time, I had mixed feelings at best about counseling. I tried going to one session with a counselor that my mom had selected, and I hated it. My mom was doing her best to fix a broken family dynamic, but the counselor just wasn't for me. And I've since learned that there are so many different types of counseling, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. I personally am not a big fan of talk therapy counselors because I think they have a tendency to rehash without providing new tools to better cope. And to me, it feels like a money grab. I read a book called Bad Therapy by Abigail Shrier, and it made a lot of sense to me. Opening up old wounds repeatedly and living in a place full of darkness and despair most likely doesn't help anyone. I do believe it's important to talk about things and through things, but not necessarily on a weekly, daily, or even regular basis, but kind of more like as needed. And I actually think that friends and family can provide great talk therapy. The kind of therapy that made the biggest impact for me, as I mentioned in the question above, was cognitive behavioral therapy, because it didn't take me repeatedly into those dark, sad places, but rather it gave me tools to deal with any stressors, including past trauma and future trauma. And this was really empowering and uplifting. I didn't feel stuck, and I found it far more useful. The UFC actually provides a performance coach. His name is Micah, and he helped me tremendously with performance. But I also found that these things translated easily into my everyday life and those stressors. One thing I never used to practice that I do in some form every single day now is getting present. I remember where I started practicing this, and it was in the shower. I would take the first minute or two and focus on gauging all of my senses, feeling the running water, smelling the steam and the soap, looking at the way that the water leaves the shower head. In some places it sprays, and in other places it drips. And then simply noticing when my thoughts have began drifting to somewhere else, and then bringing myself back to my senses and being right where my feet are and nowhere else. Our brains will always naturally wander, and this is okay. The goal is not to stay focused flawlessly. The goal is to notice when you've gone somewhere else and then to be able to bring yourself back to here and now. This may sound silly, but I believe it is life-changing and it's a great skill set. It's something we can control and we can utilize in any situation of stress or frustration or anxiety. You might like to listen to episode 39, where I'm actually being interviewed by Scott Groves, and I talk about some of these things more in depth. I hope this is helpful, and I saw you had another question, but I will answer that in the next fan Q&A podcast. Next, we have Elvis. He said, "Good day, Miesha. Great podcasts, and recently started listening to your podcast and great stuff. Great topics, and I just want to ask if it is good to take ice bath to help with the recovering process. I recently had minor tears in my hip and shoulder from a fall, but I ended up landing wrong in the fall to the ground." Okay. This happened a few months ago, but I'm a type 2 diabetic and does take longer for myself to heal, and it seems my shoulder injury is taking too long to heal. So I wonder if taking an ice plunge might help. Thanks, and keep up the great work. All right. Hey, Elvis, I am so sorry to hear about the injury. I'm no stranger to that, and they're never fun. But assuming that you are a male, I think ice baths would be probably good for you, but maybe not specifically for your injury. It's important to know that I'm not a doctor or anything like that. So anything I mention here is not intended to be medical advice. And of course, you should always check with a medical professional. With that said, I'd look for more of a functional medical practitioner than your standard run of the mill, because oftentimes they don't really understand holistic treatment approaches. They want to fix everything with a pill. They're only going to approve forms of therapy or help that are, covered by insurance and yada, yada. I digress. I actually believe that the Mark Pro would be a great tool for you to use because it helps activate the lymphatic system, which removes waste that can build up. That's AKA inflammation. And it allows new and fresh blood flow, which can in turn speed the healing process. But whatever you do, my advice, don't ice it. And I mean locally. That's different than an ice bath. I would recommend you listen to episode 4 of my podcast with Gary Reinl, also known as the Anti-Iceman, for one of my most popular episodes, and rightfully so. Movement is typically good for injuries, so keep it moving, but as Gary would say, use your brain, never cause pain. And as a type 2 diabetic, I believe you could also benefit from listening to either episode 19 with Carnivore JT, which talks about the potential long-term benefits of eating more meat and how to do that on a budget, or episode 43 with Candy and Tom. We discuss the effect of insulin and how to effectively regulate that. All right, thank you for that question. Next up, we have Michelle. I hope I'm saying that right. It's Michal with like a little mark over the A. All right, the question is, inspiring journey, Miesha. UFC champion to a thoughtful mother, deeply exploring the dynamic qualities and values of relationships and accountability. Following up on your concern with accountability, how do you see today's focus on independence and self-fulfillment impacting relationships and authentic connection? Could a shared sense of commitment or values help foster a deeper intimacy? And then in parentheses, it has accountability. Well, I think this is a great question, Michelle. And for what it's worth, I've noticed since becoming a mother that it's very natural and almost inherent for your child to be selfish. And I've since learned it's essential to their survival. I've seen clips of featherless young baby birds pushing their siblings out of the nest to their death so that they can get enough food to ensure their survival. This is wild, but if you step back and think about what this all means, I interpret it that it is first and foremost important to value and take care of yourself. Being secure in yourself is a healthy precursor to a flourishing relationship. But I think your question here more so lies in the movement of hyper independence under the guise that you're better off alone than you are with a healthy significant other. For example, sometimes you'll see ladies, boasting about the fact that they don't need a man. And while I agree, woman does not need a man or anyone else in a relationship, and vice versa. But there is room for argument that if you enter a relationship with this mindset that you aren't willing to give ground and make a person feel valued, the miss could result in a major loss of connection, which will then in turn feed into the cycle of breakup and the idea of independence being what is best. I do want to acknowledge that I'm not condoning the idea of staying in an unhealthy relationship. Lord knows I did that for long enough. But I have since found a man that is secure in who he is, and it's a beautiful thing because we flourish independently and cohesively. And I think that is the ultimate goal. It certainly is a fine line to walk, but I think if you've never focused on yourself, you do a disservice to those around you. And I think if you always focus on yourself, you do a disservice to those around you. So the truth is somewhere in the middle. You've got to do enough self-reflection and work to feel confident in who you are, and so that you can feel confident in supporting any and all of your loved ones in their self-discovery journey as well. I think this supports the idea that a shared sense of commitment is very important, even if that means sharing the commitment to elevate yourself while supporting your significant other in elevating themselves. Because truthfully, nobody can do the work for you. For lack of a better example, if two people are stuck out in the middle of the ocean, it makes the most sense for each one to swim independently, yet they are in the ocean together and they share a mutual goal of getting out of the ocean. But if one of them is trying to do the swimming for both of them, they likely both drown. Do you need the other person to be stuck in the ocean with you to survive? No, not at all. But it's a hell of a lot less lonely. And in the moment when you might think about giving up, having that other person there for morale can make all the difference. I feel like it's similar in relationships. You work together in ways and you work independently in other ways, and both are important. Thanks. Moving on to Glenn, your question is, what is the one quote that you say to other people to motivate them? Or what is one quote that motivates you? Hey, Glenn. All right. I love a good quote, so I'm excited to share this with you. One of my favorite quotes is by Thomas Jefferson, and it says, "If you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done." And I just find this to be so true. Because doing the wrong thing harder doesn't produce better results. This applies in fighting, like throwing a punch out of range. It doesn't help to throw it harder when it wasn't going to land in the first place. But it also applies in our everyday lives. Sometimes we get stuck in this mentality that we just have to work harder. But we don't always step back and analyze that if the work that we're doing in the first place is actually moving us towards a goal or even a direction in life that we want to go. So I think we need to get intentional about life and our goals. Stop being so passive. And when something isn't working, we can't be afraid to pivot. And sometimes, even when things are going well, it's still a great idea to take a risk and do something different, in my opinion. That wraps up the questions for this episode. So thank you so much for submitting your questions. And I encourage any and all of you to reach out with questions you have, whether it be a personal question directed at me or something you were curious about in prior episodes that you want to dive deeper into and know more about. Remember, you can go to mieshatate.com and submit a question there. And also you can sign up for my newsletter while you're there. Thank you. The Built for Growth podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Our content may include sponsorship and affiliate links through which we earn a small commission on sales made through those links.